Welcome to the Urban Wine Club podcast. Pour a glass, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Milagro cocktail webinar. I'm your host, Foti Stamos, and with me, my co-hosts, Ari Kalos and Catherine Copeland.
Hello, everyone.
This has been
Hello.
This has been a well-anticipated segment for us. Tequila has been explosive over the last handful of years, and as it's made its way from sassy cocktail bars to fine dining restaurants, our special guest, Jaime Salas, Milagro's national brand ambassador, will give us the history and scoop on tequila while demonstrating two delicious cocktail recipes. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome our special guest, Jaime Salas. Welcome to our show.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Hey, everybody out there in, what is it? The intersphere, the internet.
The interwebs.
The interweb, showing my age here. My name is Jaime Salas. As mentioned, I gladly wear the Milagro Tequila shirt. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I've been working in this industry for just over 20. I am excited to share anything and everything that I know and demystify tequila as much as possible. So let's begin there. Tequila is a very varied and a very entrenched Mexican distillate that's come about to it's come to be known as we know it today throughout the centuries. So I'd be remiss if I didn't start with some anecdotal, historical, cool stuff that most of us latch onto, especially if you're a history buff, right? So let's go back to pre-Hispanic Mexico, right before Mexico was the Mexico we know today, back to the Aztecs, back to the Mayans, and talk about the birthplace of tequila. If you know tequila, it's made from the agave plant, specifically the blue agave plant. However, endemic to Mexico, there's over 150 to 200 varietals of agave plants, albeit we can't precisely tell you how many because of the way the genus breaks apart. Few people know this, but a tequila or an agave plant, right, what tequila is made from or mezcal is made from, which is the big category, right? Tequila is a type of mezcal, but not all mezcal is tequila. And we can talk a little bit about that later. But the idea is that it's closer related to the lily plant, even to the asparagus, than it is to the aloe plant. Although most of you probably think, an agave plant looks a little bit like an aloe, right? Yeah. It's in fact closer related to an asparagus, just to give you an idea. This is a beautiful, noble, highly respected plant, highly coveted by the Aztecs, right? The Native Americans, if you will, right, of that part of the Americas. And essentially what happened was you take this plant, you scour and you break away the leaves and you scratch the inside, you essentially hurt the plant, damage the plant, and the plant will start to secrete this beautiful milky substance. This milky substance is called pulque in present day Mexico, but basically back then it was called ocli and pulque, and basically those two terms meant fermented, right, or fermented juice, if you will, stemming from this plant. It would take that, and that is what would be used in religious Aztec rituals, right? Think of, hierarchy back in those days. The average commoner, Aztec could not drink this stuff. We're talking about 3 to 4% up to 5% alcohol by volume, right? Think of a fermented agave wine, right? After 3 or 4 days, it would ferment, and this is what they would drink. And there was this perception that literally, if you know anything about Aztecs, they believed in these creatures, these gods, these mystical creatures that represented everything from the soil, the earth, the sky, right? The winged serpent, all these things. And that's why they constructed the pyramids the way they did. It was a way to ascend. It was a way to get closer to the gods. So what they would do is they take this agave nectar and they would drink it and they would get inebriated. However, they would interpret that as getting closer to the gods. There's an old folklore in Mexico, in pre-Hispanic Mexico, called 400 conejos, 400 rabbits. And it's about 400 rabbits that suckled at the teat of Mayahuel, which in their culture is kind of like Mother Nature, right? She oversees all living things. She's particularly associated to the agave plant because the agave plant was so crucial to their livelihood. Every bit of the agave plant was used. The leaves for thatching roofs, the pointy needles at the tips to thread things together, used to cook all kinds of things, right? They used it for fire. They used it, they would get the mulch and they would bake it and use it and eat it as well. So there's all, and of course they would drink it, right? So there were all these uses for it, and it was highly, highly coveted. So they would give this juice to only the priest, the high priest, and the emperor, of course. And the idea was every rabbit suckling on the teat of my well represented one level of inebriation. Most of us here probably can relate to 3 or 4 levels of inebriation, right? You start to drink, you feel good, you start to talk more, you start to become more convivial, and perhaps if you drink too much, you might have a headache the next day, right? But they believe that there were 400 stages of drunkenness, and that with each elevation, you got closer and you ascended closer to God. So now keep in mind, this is what they were drinking. This is the first introduction of anything from the agave plant to the native people. Then in the 16th century, right, the Spanish come over. They come over with their brandy. They come over with their cooked brandy, and they start to notice that these guys are both cooking the plant, eating it, and of course fermenting the juice and drinking it. And so they would describe this thing as sweet nectar coming. The Aztecs would say would come from the gods, and they would notice all of this ritual going on. Well, we don't know for a fact, but we think to this day that is where we intersect with the Spaniards, and distillation is brought to the Americas. Now, why we don't know for a fact is right now in Mexico, they pre-carbon dated. They now know that by carbon dating, they know that there have been distillates or distillation going on in Mexico prior to the arrival of the Spaniards. Right? The Filipinos got there first as well. We don't know who quite to credit. It may very well be that they were distilling before even the Filipinos got there. But the bottom line is we don't quite know. So you can imagine there's all that conversation going on. Nevertheless, tequila, this beautiful nectar from the agave plant is still going on. It's still being fermented to this day in Mexico. But they started to cook the plant and they started to then mash and ferment and distill it, right? So think of present day mezcal. You cook in the oven and earth and under earth, you cook the agaves under earth. You get as many agaves as you can together, wild agave, and you start to cook it, ferment it, distill it. And that was the beginning of mezcal. As time went on, as Mexico developed, this mezcal started to redefine itself and become tequila. And I'll explain what that means. But before I do, Catherine, do you know what cognac is, technically, what category of spirit it is? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I wanted to engage in...
I know it has to be made in Cognac, France.
Right, and that's like tequila. It has to be made in a specific part. But tequila is part of the mezcal family. Do you remember what cognac is part of? It's a distillate coming from grapes.
Oh, grappa? From grape?
Close, what do you go?
How about brandy?
It's a brandy, exactly. You guys were both. So it's a brandy. Same premise. Tequila is technically a mezcal. Back in those days, it was made like current day mezcal is made. But as Mexico started to industrialize, Mexico started to evolve, as more and more people started to get money, become independent, there's a lot of mestizaje going on, meaning blending of cultures. That's something that the Spanish brought to Mexico. You had, Spaniards blending along with the natives. You started to have people in this hierarchy class system, essentially. And as people started to get mobily upward, they started to create their own distilleries. They started to ferment and create their own tequila, and they started to impart innovations. So what happens first? At this point, most of Mexico is making some sort of agave distillate, but the mid-occidental part of Mexico, present-day Jalisco, the cradle of tequila, if you will, started to make their own type of mezcal, right, with the agave plant. And that's when they started to isolate the blue agave. That's when they started to cultivate the blue agave. If you're into corn, for example, corn is Mexico's lifeblood. Tortillas are made out of corn, tamales are made out of corn. A lot of corn is used, right? Mexico took about 900 years. The Aztecs took 900 years to domesticate corn in the way from a reed to what it is now, right? Well, they tried doing the same thing with the agave plant. They started to domesticate it. That actually happened way, way before the Spanish. They were already planting these plants, starting to domesticate them. And so now, at this point, 17th century, they're moving, they're distilling, they're fermenting, and things are starting to change. Agaves went from being cooked subterranean underground to being cooked steam-baked above ground, right? They started to get mashed up using automated millers. And they started to impart column stills for distillation, not just pot stills. And all of this stuff started to cultivate and create what we now know is our denomination of origin, and essentially defines tequila the way that cognac is defined, to Catherine's point, that it has to come from a region in cognac, and all these different nuances, or Armagnac, if you will, but they're still part of brandies. Same thing happened with tequila, right? It started to come from a specific region, made in a specific way, utilizing one particular agave plant out of the 150 plus that exist, and it started to become its own thing. So President in Mexico started to recognize its own denomination of origin. A few anecdotes here to share with you guys. First distillate ever in the Americas, right? I'm talking North, South America, is in fact tequila or mezcal, right? Which tequila, which tequila is a part of. The first denomination of origin ever given was also in Mexico, was given to tequila. So there's a lot of great points that have happened. Now Mexico has a ton of denominations of origin, a ton of great things coming out of there, both in food and drink. But that was the first, right? So it really helped to establish Mexico as this producer of distillate spirits, very unique to the world. I mean, here is a distillate that's made out of a succulent, essentially, right? And has a lot of great history entrenched in it. So, we're running out of time in that regard, but I'll tell you, things like, Mexico, like the rest of the world, had its ups and downs with the spirit. It is right now, as Spoti said, one of the most recognized spirits in the world. It is perhaps Mexico's most recognized export. It is highly regarded. We've now gotten there, right? It used to be that we looked at tequila and thought, it's gut rot. What is that? Not taking into account, because of some of the brands that are representing, the category, not taking into account that this is a skillfully crafted spirits through generations that has earned the right to really, evoke respect, given that it represents where it comes from. It's terroir driven, like wine, like cognac. It speaks to where it comes from. That salinity, that floral, that vegetal, that fruital, all those things come from where the agave plant is born and raised and cultivated. And then ultimately the plant itself, right? All these things converge to give you something very unique, which is why it has a denomination of origin. There are currently 5 states that are allowed to grow, cultivate, and produce tequila, and 9 for mezcal. But there's really one prominent state in the region of tequila called Jalisco that does 98% of these brands, 90% of these distilleries, and the entire state has the right to grow, cultivate, and produce, whereas some they would be considered counties in the other 4 states. So it really is a cradle, right, who's helped develop, and again, like cognac, helped to define this particular type of spirit. Mexico went through dry periods. Mexico went through times where, prohibition, where they weren't, able to sell. And so tequila has had a tough road getting to where it is today. But in the last 20, 30 years, it's done phenomenal things. If you think of, for example, prohibition here, you'll notice back in Mexico, tequila numbers spike, right? Because the Americans crossed over and drank at that point what they used to call, Mexican whiskey. If you ever heard that term, that's where a lot of it was referencing, is that there was nothing here. They would go down, right, and they would get this Mexican moonshine or Mexican whiskey, depending on whether it was aged or not. And they were first introduced to agave that way. The world wars, all these things, the war with Mexico, all these things started to introduce Americans. And perhaps it's not by chance, right, that Americans consume the most tequila in the world. I think it was until 2015 or 2017, forgive me, 2015 or 2017, that for the first time in the history of tequila, Mexico surpassed or got right up to the same quantity, same amount of liters of tequila consumption that the United States did. This is now, mind you, this is the country that makes it, grows it, cultivates it, right, produces it. It was the first time ever that Mexicans drank as much tequila as Americans did, just to give you some anecdotes there as well. So we've come a long way, right? And it's highly appreciated, and we love it because we feel as though tequila is now getting its due in regards to just how much time and effort goes into growing and cultivating the plant in itself, right? Which takes about 6 to 8 years to come to maturation. And that's just that type of agave plant. That's not counting the other agave plants that are used for other type of mezcals or other agave distillates that take up to 25 years, 30 years to grow, right? So we're at that point now. Did you want me to jump now where Milagro lives within all of that?
Yeah, real quickly,
Yes.
For me, I've been drinking tequila for a long time, and I continue to do so. But you just broke it down so easily to understand now what tequila is for all of us that are listening. But can we quickly just touch upon what we know in the market, the 3 different offerings of tequila from Blanco, Añejo, Reposado. Before we jump into the history of Milagro.
Absolutely. So I'll use Milagro to exemplify that, but I did want to say one thing, Foti. So basically, we talked about the denomination of origin. That was established way before the body that now governs tequila, which is called the Tequila Regulatory Council. They in turn have helped set the bumper rails, the guardrails, and the defining regulations, right, that define the spirit. Oftentimes a lot of people we forget that the things that are on these bottles, the descriptors, if you will, it's not just telling you what's inside. These are legal designations that we as producers have to observe and respect. So when you see that it says 100% agave, regardless of whether it says blue or not, it's blue because it has to be, right? If it doesn't say 100%, you have to assume that it's less than 100% because by law they have to put 100% if it is 100%. Gotcha. Whether it's a silver, reposado, and añejo, right? I'll get into defining those, but I just want to provide some context. Those are not only descriptors telling you what's in the bottle, but they're legal designations to say we, as Milagro, whatever brand, whoever, you followed the guidelines, if you will, right? The obligatory, strict rules of the game in order to bear that name. So what I'll say is this, I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. Based on the denomination of origin, based on the regulations set by the CRT, tequila is described in the following ways. First and foremost, it is a type of mezcal we discussed that. It has to come from the blue agave plant specifically, which we talked about just how varied that endemic selection is in Mexico, right? And it'll make sense to you why Mexicans have brought it in, and it's part of every bit of our culture, and you're going to see a lot more agave distillates coming through for that reason. There are two types of tequila allowed by law. There's the 100% agave tequila and less than 100%. That's to say that we allow in the tequila industry, in the category of the spirit, we allow a tequila that wants to only make a less than 100%. They can do so as long as there's 51% of the fermentable sugars that are contained in this bottle. That are contained in this bottle are coming from the blue agave plant. The other 49% just have to be fermentable sugars, right? And typically it's sugar cane, corn, that kind of thing. Okay, so that is your less than 100% blue agave. Now, to bear the name 100% blue agave, it's just that simple. It just means that 100% of your fermentable sugars are coming from the blue agave plant. So what do you think I'm going to recommend? And I want to preface it by saying that I don't say this because I work for Milagro. I say this because if you're an agave lover, if you love tequila, try to stick to 100% agave tequilas because you're getting 100% of all those nuances, that terroir we spoke of is coming from the blue agave plant, and you're supporting the industry in that way, right? So that's the beauty of that. Those are the two types. Within the two types, you mentioned three, I like to call them expressions or styles, but really Mexico allows 5, okay? The first is your silver or blanco, and what that means is that it's a tequila that after distillation, regardless of your type of distillation process, can come in contact with oak, but cannot exceed 60 days. So either it doesn't come in contact with oak at all, you leave it in for 5 days, you leave it for 45 days, it just can't exceed 60 days. A reposado or a repose tequila means that it's come in contact with oak a minimum of 2 months, typically up to or just under a year. An añejo, anything that bears the name añejo, it means aged. It means that, and it's premised off a year. So what it means is that to bear the name añejo, you get this beautiful, caramel coloring, all derived from its contact with oak, the esterification process. That has to take place between a year and 3 years, right? In a barrel by law, by the way. So silver, repo, if you want to mellow them in a wooden trough, in a wooden vat, as long as it's coming in contact with the tequila, it's perfectly fine. When you get into the añejo, the third style of tequila, it has to be in a 600-liter or less barrel, and it has to be a minimum of a year up to 3 years. Anything that touches wood longer than 3 years automatically, by law, has to be cataloged, right? And this is where the regulations step in, because what this is telling you is that I don't care if what you have at home is Milagro or any other brand. If it says añejo on it, what does that tell you? At least a year, in a barrel, 600 liters or less, a maximum of 3 years. The next category is an extra añejo, right? You have your silvers, your reposados, your añejos, and extra añejos. An extra añejo simply means it's come in contact with some type of oak barrel a minimum of 3 years, not to exceed. With no cap at this point, right? So that's to say that your tequila could be 5-7 years old. That's perfectly within the realm and the prerogative of the producer, right? The fifth and final category is something we call joven. It's a little bit of a convoluted one to explain, but essentially what that means is that it's a tequila that is blended with other finished tequila. So say we took a Blanco, but then Foti's like, oh, but I want to soften it up a little bit. And, me and my friends got together and we're going to make our own tequila. And, the way I like it is I like a little bit of a dry finish at the end, a little bit of an oakiness coming through. Well, if we were to put the tequila straight into a barrel, it's just going to become a repo or añejo, right? But if we take a finished Blanco and a finished añejo that's seen barrel at least a minimum of a year, and then we blend it together, well, now you have the benefit of the both, right, in a finished product. And by law now, it doesn't qualify in either category, so it has to default to a joven. So those are the 5 types allowed by law, right? Your Blanco, silver, repo, añejo, extra añejo, or joven tequilas. Woo. Does that make sense?
Like the rosé of tequila.
That was a mouthful. But actually, you know what? Now I know better. Because
well, I'll give it to you this way. 0 to 60 days, that's your Blanco, right? Minimum 2 months, your reposado. Minimum of year, your añejo. Minimum of 3 years, your extra añejo, right? And then you have your joven. That's just categorically speaking. That's the beauty of tequila. It's like a wine, right? It's all this terroir, all these different expressions, and they're all compounded by how the distiller puts their hands on it, right? There's the cultivation of the plant, there's the producing of the plant that yields you the spirit, and then it's what you do to finish it, how you age it, right? Everyone's going to vary a little bit. When I get into Milagro now, you'll understand what we do within each step. So if you want, I can jump into that, and that'll clarify things.
Definitely. Let's talk about Milagro.
Well, at Milagro, we're 100% estate-grown tequila in the Jaliscan highlands. Why is the highlands even relevant or important? Because this plant thrives at high altitudes in semi-arid climates. And so we deliberately have chosen a mile-high area in Mexico to cultivate and produce and grow our own agaves to our own specifications with partner growers, meaning we don't buy on the open market. We know what we're getting, right? So we start there first and foremost. Milagro's philosophy, just to give you some insight, it's about taking the best of what we know is tried and true and has historically worked traditionally in terms of tequila production, those things we value that we know are going to give us flavor, and then innovations that we know are going to help us get to a more refined, a more, our expression of agave is a little bit more elevated, and we want the consumer to not experience a bite or burn and forget those old school days of like, oh, it's really rustic, but it burns too much. I like the flavor, but it's hard to drink. We wanted to appeal to the newer, new generation palates as they evolve. I'm a big foodie, and one of the things, other bartenders ask and folks in this industry constantly ask is like, why? Well, what's the concept or what's the premise? Well, think about this. A 200-year-old bottle of wine, we can all, if we're hardcore drinkers, we can very well find benefit and love what it is that we're having based on the premise that it's aged and maybe you like a little oakiness and it's great or what have you, but you might also be like, wait a minute, this is not for me, right? This is perhaps too much, right? In terms of how it tastes, in terms of the viscosity it's developed and all these things. Palates change, people's likes change. As things evolve, people change, right? There are tequilas that, perhaps were a lot harsher then, but are more refined now. And that could be through processes that were standardized and perhaps even industrialized, or it could be intentional. In our case, it's very much intentional. Milagro is only 20 years old, just over 20 years old. It was established in 1998. And the premise here is that we want something that is going to be, palatable, refined, agave forward, but that's going to give you all the best expressions of the agave in a way that's, that will work in a cocktail, in a way that will work neat. And I'll explain how we do that next. So essentially, we're 21 years old. Again, that's why that gives you context as to why we are big believers and, taking the best of what we know is tried and true and throwing in some innovations that are going to differentiate us from the rest of the pack. So you all know there's a lot of tequilas out there. Particularly when we launched 22 years ago, 21 plus, you have to remember Mexico is at the forefront, much like it is today in terms of art, in terms of culinary and all these great things. It's very influential around the world. But all the tequilas that were out there that were there were pretty much your standards, or some of these bigger names that were known. Nothing quite looked like us or was produced like us. So we did something innovative. And what we did was essentially, again, first and foremost, pick where we're going to grow this agave, wait a few years, grow the agave, take it, cut off all the leaves, and then slow roast it. Because slow roasting is something we know is tried and true and works. And it does the best to extract as much of the flavor, develop as much of the flavor that we want. So we don't flash cook it. We don't speed cook it. We slow roast it for about 48 hours, 36 hours with the oven on at full blast, steam oven, above ground. We then turn off that oven. It continues to radiate heat. It continues to cook. About 12 hours later, 48 hours later, we open the doors. The temperature drops. We let it acclimate to the outside temperature. And at that point, we extract the agaves and then we press them. We press them 5 times over. If you've never had the pleasure of stepping into a tequila distillery, imagine Christmas time. Imagine pumpkin spice. Imagine cooked sweet potato. That's what it smells like, right? That is what we're caramelizing. That's what the plant smells like when we're creating those starches, right? From starches over to sugars, where we're converting them. So after that happens and it's pressed 5 times over, it's the runoff, that beautiful sweet juice that we take, and we put that into our fermentation tanks. That's for 72 hours, longer than most distilleries. Again, this is where congeners and all those beautiful things we as humans perceive as flavor come from, right? Just like brewing beer, just like you start to get these beautiful nuances. You feed the yeast and they start to expel gases, but all of this is what develops flavors, right? And we want to then take those and distill those, refine them, develop a higher grade alcohol, but you have to know what you're doing. That's where our master distiller comes in. Unlike most tequila companies these days who have gone by way of having master distillers and have focused on more production managers and that kind of things, we have our master distiller named Pedro Juarez, and he oversees this entire process, and he ensures that we're done a very specific way and that we're consistently made the right way, right, in a way that he specified and helped develop. So we distill using 2 types of stills, which is very uncommon in this industry. One is first distillation is run through a small pot still, copper line, stainless on the outside. We do our first pass through there, and our second distillation, because by the way, you have to distill 2 times minimum to be called tequila, right, by law. That's another regulation. The second distillation is done through a column still to polish and refine the tequila and bring it up to alcohol spec. So don't think of a whiskey or our vodka still, which can be 3-4 stories high. We're talking about 3 to 4 meters high, 32 plate system. Some of them was a copper plate. So we've even modified that. So that's part of our innovation. And again, that's just to refine Milagro's taste profile. And then lastly, how you age, how you dress your tequila, how you interact with oak is equally as defining. And at Milagro, we have a 6 expression portfolio, 1 part made of our core range, and this is the long elongated bottles, and then we have something called our select range. And that is another silver repo and añejo made slightly different. So we at Milagro use American white oak whiskey casks, if you will, for all of our core range here. And then for the select line, we do a combination of both American whiskey and brand new or virgin French oak, and we blend them together just to give you an idea, right? So it's blending. It's not finishing. It's taking the 2 down, disproportionately laying them down for disproportionate amount of times, bringing them back out, and then blending them together. So every select barrel reserve has a little bit of French, a little bit of American oak in it, right? Again, innovations, different things that we do in the market to provide a different taste profile and different experience for the consumer. Since then, we've covered a lot of awards, highly recognized, and at Milagro, we're plugging away little by little, contributing to the tequila landscape. So it's been a fun time.
Oh, that's fascinating. Wow. Fascinating. Now I think, Jaime, we can probably get into our cocktail demonstration.
Absolutely. I'll just getting some ice. So having said all of that, I have 2 ways I approach cocktails, right? The first is, as you're doing Forte, is like you're doing it simply ice. You're taking in all the expression of the agave. I love to, for me, it's imperative that we make a balanced cocktail. So whether it's a highball, 3 simple ingredient cocktail, whether it's a margarita, everything should be in balance. So the agave always does, it expresses itself in the way it should. I want to preface for everybody out there that when I wanted to do something very simple, that was very deliberate on my part. So we're doing 2 3 ingredient cocktails. both equally good, just done slightly different. They're riffs on classics, Mexican classics. The first one is called Our Freshest Margarita, which is a riff on a modern classic recognized by bartenders all over the world. It's a margarita. It doesn't contain Cointreau. It's not your typical margarita with, an orange liqueur or citrus liqueur along with tequila. It's actually agave nectar in place of it. It was created at Tommy's bar and restaurant over in San Francisco, Tommy's Cantina back in the day. And so the idea here is that it's a riff on a modern day classic. So, but it's super simple to make, 3-ingredient reliance, and what's important here is that you make it right? Because the less ingredients, the more they each factor in. So, what do? Well, we take our shaker, right? Set it there. I'm going to tell you everything in proportions. I'm going to say that you should have a jigger on hand, and if you don't, it's all good. You can use a shot glass, right? But the idea here is that as long as you keep the proportions equal to one another, then you can scale this cocktail and make as many as you wish. But we're going to use we're going to make one, right? We're going to use proportions based on one cocktail, or I'm going to make a cocktail, and then of course you can scale it. I'm happy to take on any questions. So 3 ingredients, as I mentioned before. Well, one of the most important is the lime juice, right? Because the agave here is going to come through, obviously, the tequila, and lime juice is hyper important. So I'm going to go with 2 parts Milagro silver. So you can pour that into my measuring device here. And that's going to be the base of a margarita, right? I am going to do 1 ounce fresh pressed lime juice, and I want to show you just how easy it is to press. The beautiful thing about Mother Nature is she's been very generous to us. An average good size Persian lime gives you anywhere between 3/4 of an ounce to 1.25 ounces of lime. So that gives you an idea of how many limes you would. Let's just round out to 1, and that many limes is what you would need to make 10 margaritas, right? 10 limes will get you about 10 ounces. Maybe get 12 to 13 for good measure, just to ensure that. So we have 2 parts Milagro silver in there. Probably refreshing citric. It's going to really make for a great base of the margarita. 1 part fresh pressed lime juice. And then I broke my agave nectar, so let me bring my agave nectar out here. I was when the bottle fell over, the container that had the agave nectar broke. But we're going to go with 3/4 of an ounce of agave, right? And again, that goes right into our shaker. Now, I think the next best question is to salt our glass or not salted glass. What do you guys think?
I always say salt.
I love salted too.
I agree. And you know what? I'm going to say to the audience out there that you can use whatever method you want. Salt is optional. We're going to keep it 3 ingredients here. Salt is, in fact, optional. But I will say this. There's a reason for salt, kind of like the way the 3 of us were having this conversation a few minutes ago, right? Where we started is that there's an actual reason for something. Salinity in cocktails brightens up your cocktail and actually prepares the palate, and it makes it a little brighter, and it makes it really, really pop in the mouth. So I won't say, I'll show you a trick for the next cocktail. In this case, you can salt it, not salt it. It is absolutely up to you. But I would just consider that, right? As long as it's not hurting your health by any means, I don't want to suggest you do something that, isn't health conscious. But what you want to do is you want to just have a little bit of salt in it just to open it up. So I'm going to put it on the rim. That's the bottom line here. Then I'm going to shake for about 8 to 10 seconds. The idea here is we want to get the shaker nice and frosty. I don't know who out there is a big cocktail person. If you want to geek out, I'm happy to geek out with you. But there is rhyme and reason to all of this. There really, really, truly is. What happens is you not only want to bring the cocktail down to a refreshingly, cold level, but, well, before I answer this, tell me, does anybody know what the other benefit is to shaking, the cocktail and getting it nice and frosty for 8 to 10 seconds? What's another benefit? I'm gonna grab my
Catherine?
Well, I don't know if it's a benefit, but I know that if you shake it with the ice and you keep those rocks in it, it's gonna water down and dilute the cocktail a little bit. I don't know if you're using that as a benefit.
It's in fact a benefit. You actually need that. That's part of the ingredient of the cocktail, right? We oftentimes don't talk about it, but an 8 to 10 second shake is going to dilute our cocktail down by about 30%, and you want that. That water is going to round out your cocktail. It's going to soften it up just a little bit more, and it's going to give us that dilution to help us balance it out. And the more ice you use, the nicer the shake, the more your cocktail will stay together. Once it's done, right, it won't separate nearly as fast. So there you have it. That's our freshest margarita. Super simple. 2 parts Milagro silver, 1 part fresh lime juice, 3/4 part agave nectar. Nice, bright, refreshing, balanced. Don't be afraid of ice. It's your friend as long as you do it right. There's huge benefits to that. So that there is our 3-ingredient freshest margarita. Super simple to make. The only ask I would have is that you please press fresh. The other things I tell, the other tidbits I tell folks is if you don't want to press your own lime juice at home, stores nowadays press it for you, right? You can literally go to stores where they sell fresh juice and say, hey, can I get 12, 13 ounces, half a gallon of lime juice? And you'd be surprised. Most gourmet stores sell it now. All right, the next one is a cocktail premised on also 3 ingredients, but what's highly popular right now. Yes, everybody's drinking tequila sodas and what have you, but formally it's the highball cocktail, right? And if you ever had a whiskey highball, you know the benefits. It's by definition, all it is just your base spirit, something fizzy, right, on the rocks. That's it, in a long drink, in a long glass. And this is no different. This is a paloma. It's perhaps Mexico's most popular cocktail after the margarita. It's essentially grapefruit soda or grapefruit juice with soda water and your favorite Repo or silver with a splash of lime. I decided to do a little riff on it. It's called the Paloma Rosada because it is, in fact, a pink paloma. I personally love pink grapefruit specifically. I know it sounds geeky, but if you're into fruit, if you're into cooking, you know that every one of these varietals tastes different, right? They all bring something different to the table. So I love my traditional palomas, but I wanted to do something a little bit more floral, a little bit more bright. So I went ahead with a pink grapefruit. So Catherine, I believe you're going to make this one with me. Show people just how simple it is. So I have the ice. In this case, you can do it before the ice or after the ice. As long as you follow the proportions, you can put the ice in later. But just for show and tell here, I went and iced it all the way to the top. Again, don't be afraid of ice. The more ice you have, the quicker it'll come down to temperature, and the quicker it'll actually stop diluting. So that's why it's okay to over ice rather than under ice. You ever under ice a cocktail, Catherine, and or a drink, and by the time it chills down, your ice is completely melted?
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so the idea is the more ice you do, the quicker it'll chill down and the quicker it'll stop melting. So that's why you want to over ice, right? So ice all the way to the top. We're going to go with a part, and a half of Milagro Reposado in this case. I didn't want to do silver. I wanted to do something that's going to give us a little bit of that warm spice, right, to complement that pink grapefruit. So we're going to go with 1.5 parts of Milagro Reposado. This tequila, I just realized I didn't tell you, right? I was going to work this in. So we do no aging on Milagro Silver. This Milagro Reposado comes in contact with American white oak whiskey cask for about 4 to 6 months. So that's where it gets its beautiful color and a beautiful spiced caramel note. And our añejo spends about 14 to 16 months, okay, in contact with American. So that's what gets all its darker tone and a lot more, cooked nuances and things like that. So we have our tequila in there. I'm going to say half, instead of our last cocktail, we just want a little bit of that lime to brighten it up. We want a little bit of that acidity. So I'm going to go with half a part instead of a full part.
Jaime, can I interject real quick?
Absolutely.
I want to make sure, I think my sister's logged in. This is her favorite drink, so I want to make sure she's paying attention right now. I just want to make sure, because every time we go out, this is what she orders.
Palomas, that's she's singing to my heart. It's one of my favorites as well. So I'm going to top off with pink grapefruit here. Ice it down a little bit more. And then, we talked about salt earlier, but palomas in particular, I think, really benefit from that salt. I just think they brighten up. So rather than rim the glass, I'm going to ask you to take a pinch of salt and just drop it on the top, just so we get that salinity sort of blended in there, right?
That's what I'll do there. With me.
What's that?
I should have brought salt outside with me.
You know what? My bad. I should have stressed that. Yeah, for me, palomas really, really brighten up and really come to life when you do that. Now, typically I garnish this with grapefruit just to tell the world and to really entice my palate when I look at it to say, listen, there's grapefruit in here. But today, I have plenty of limes to go around, so I'm just going to give it another lime wheel. You should always garnish your cocktail because, the thing about cocktails is not only should it taste great, that's a given, but you should, or that should be something you strive for, but it should also speak to like what's in the cocktail, right? Cocktail should entice the nose, the eyes, really all parts. So there you have it. You see that beautiful pink hue. It's got a nice, beautiful floral hint on the nose. You're using what grapefruit are you using, Catherine?
So I have Fever Tree Sparkling Pink Grapefruit.
Another great one.
But yeah, and I should have brought more ice out as well. This is a bit taller than a normal Collins glass, so it looks like there's not as much in it, but this looks like a bit more of like a darker pink.
Beautiful.
But I love it. It's so good, this kind.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. And that's just going to do really well with the reposado. You can get a nice little cheers. Salud.
Cheers.
Salud.
A nice little dry finish. I love it. It's refreshing. It's bright. It's simple. What I do want to tell the audience out there, if you want a fresh riff on it, get some fresh pressed pink grapefruit. And if you don't have fresh pressed pink grapefruit, you can even cheat a little bit with let's say pasteurized or shelf-stabilized pink grapefruit, but then bring in fresh lime to bring in that acidity and that brightness, right? That it'll lack if it's been pasteurized. The thing a few people know is why we introduce lime into this, even if we use pink grapefruit and it's fresh, is that there's different acidity levels to different citrus, right? So a lot of the times when you look at your bartender, you see your bartender give backbone to whatever citrus they're using to flavor the cocktail with, and you see, well, you're using grapefruit, but then you're also using lime. It's because grapefruit doesn't have as much acidity, right? We're talking about the lower the pH, the higher the acidity, that kind of thing. And so there's rhyme and reason to all of this, really. And that's why I would encourage that. But this is just a really simple, great way, especially as Catherine mentioned, with all the great sodas. Q Drinks also makes a beautiful pink grapefruit. A lot of people make their palomas just with that, but I love the inclusion of lime and a little bit of salt. It's just going to give it more backbone, it's going to give it more brightness. You want that acidity coming through. And it's just going to make for that refreshing sort of summery vibe that you get the minute you drink a paloma, right? That's that thing
so
that it evokes in you. Yeah, exactly. So that's it. 3 ingredient cocktails, what we like to call pantry cocktails, super simple to make.
Well, guys, I think Paloma's my drink. I mean, I've been drinking different cocktails until recently. I've seen Palomas on so many different cocktail lists. I never really ordered it, but now I don't think I'm gonna shy away from it moving forward. But these are,
like I said before, Forty, my sister, every time we go out, that's her drink of choice. I never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it, but because of my sister, I know it very well. And now, thank you, Jaime, for explaining, in detail for me and for her. Now she's probably going to be making it every night at home. So I don't know if I should thank you or curse you for that.
Well,
the Paloma is perhaps the most popular drink after the margarita in Mexico. And actually, the margarita is probably more popular here than it is in Mexico, given the locals drink a lot of Paloma. So your sister's onto something.
I didn't realize how simple it could be to make, though, too.
Well, you know what? In Mexico, it started out as a highball, and actually we've made it more fancy than it originated. It originated with lime, rock salt, Mexican rock salt, right? Which is the salinity is really high, and just your tequila and your grapefruit soda. That's really how it started, and and the grapefruit soda really varied depending on where you were in the country. And then we started to make fresh versions of it, et cetera. And now, Fluffy, and you guys can attest to when you go out, you'll see a million iterations of Palomas, right? But grapefruit grapefruit has to be a constant. Grapefruit, a little bit of lime, obviously tequila, those have to be constant. But it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
That's awesome. That's very, very informative. It really changes our perception about tequila. I mean, if I can speak personally, as a whiskey Scotch drinker for many years, in the last handful of years, I started to convert to sipping tequila. And because I've appreciated tequila in its many different forms, I would hate to get cocktails with tequila because in my mind, I wanted to enjoy the purity of tequila in their different levels. But what you just broke down, these 2 recipes, I can definitely say I would not be, concerned in having a cocktail with tequila mixed in it. But having said that, Ari, I think we are at that time where we can start bringing in some questions from our audience.
Absolutely. All right. So what we have.
While we sip tequila.
Yeah.
I have to say very quickly, before I was 21, I don't condone this and don't judge me, but before I was 21, whenever we'd go out and try to sneak drinks out at the clubs and bars, it would always be a tequila drink because it always made me feel like the best and I had the best time. And again, under 21, I do not condone this, but it was my go-to drink. Anything with tequila. So good. So we have, what does special, or should I say special, mean on a bottle? Yeah.
I think you touched on it. Yeah, I think you hit it on the head with saying especial in Spanish, because there's only one brand that brings that to mind, and we're all thinking about it. So in that regard, I hate to try to be as objective as possible. That is specific to marketing. That doesn't mean anything in terms of rules and regulations, the way that Blanco, the way that 100, the way that some of these other things like made in Mexico has to be on every bottle of tequila. That is by law, right? You know, it says that we've listened to the rules and regulations, we've met all the standards, and it's a way to promote, you know, the denomination of origin. But in terms of especial, that's speaking to their promotion of what they feel is special about that product, not necessarily meaning anything specific.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Does it matter what type of wood for aging?
Absolutely. The type of wood does add different nuances to it, right? Depending on the grain, depending on the char, if it is charred, depending on where the wood sits. You know, the tequila is not like racked, you know, whiskey in most cases where it's being, you know, rotated, etc. That rarely happens in tequila, right? Whether you have misters in place, the tequila region, depending on where you are, varies in temperatures, extreme temperature swings from like 50 degrees, you know, which shocks the plant, which is also good for the plant. You can imagine, though, with the barrel sitting there in a non, you know, temperature-controlled environment, how that stresses the barrel line, the contraction and everything. So all those things come into play. So yes, French oak, American oak, whether used, whether new, all those things are going to give you different nuances, nuttiness, spice level. All those things do, in fact, factor into flavor.
Jaime, I have a quick question. You just mentioned used. Can you use a used barrel that has some other spirit in it before?
Absolutely. You can use any type of barrel you want, as long as it's some type of oak barrel, is what Mexico stipulates. Yeah. And again, it has to be less than 600 liters, especially when we get to the añejo. And you don't have to use a barrel for silver, and you don't have to use a barrel for reposado if you don't want to.
Very good. Okay. Does tequila become smoother with age?
That's an interesting one for me to answer, right? And I've answered that a million different ways, depending on any given day and what I'm feeling and how you know, how deep I want to get into the subject. Because I think with most spirits, the implication is that yes, the longer age, the smoother it gets. But I don't necessarily know that's true, especially for you mentioned being a Scotch or a whiskey drinker, right? Okay, Scotch drinker. I would say, tell me if I'm right, I would say that different nuances develop, different flavor profiles, but I don't know that smooth is always something that's directly coordinated with the age. I think agree. You can have, right? I think you can have a smooth 12-year-old, and you can have a smooth, but what's important is what characteristic, what flavors, what finishes from the wood are being imparted and what develops. Tequila is similar in that, sure, comparably to a fiery Blanco with a lot of spirit and a lot of spunk and, you know, your agave coming through and that spice level, it will temper it down a little bit, sure. But I think what happens is as your spirit becomes more rounded, think of a spirit as a cube of ice, right? Or literally that you can, you know, you've seen all these, famous bartenders now make different shaped ice cubes, just taking a knife to it, a paring knife, and just whittling it down essentially. The same way you can reconstruct an ice cube is the same way you should look at flavor and how it lands on the palate. It could be really round and smooth. It could be really sharp with a lot of edges. And so the more esterification, the more time in barrel, the more we start to smooth out those things, the more we start to impart other things, which keeps the palate busy and the brain thinking about all the beautiful oak you're picking up and the vanilla and the caramel and butterscotch. And so perceivably, what I find is that when you're in a room and you say to people and they're all drinking the same añejo, if you ask a show of hands, which one finds this a lot smoother than the last one. Sometimes you'll find that, compared to the repo, a lot smoother. Other people are like, no, in terms of alcohol, because people discern things differently, right? Other people will say, you know what, actually, in terms of alcohol content, perceivably how I feel it hits me, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about alcohol and how it lands on the palate when we say smoother. We're asking ourselves, can you still taste the alcohol? And the truth is, you can still taste the alcohol. You just the tequila, but it's a lot smoother. It's a lot rounded. So in layman's terms, sure, it gets more rounded, it gets smoother. But what I think happens is it gets more characteristics, it gets more flavor, it gets more complex, right? And therefore, you don't even think about alcohol burn. You think about just everything going on, right? So I think it's a combination of the two, quite honestly. And I think you'll find some añejos that are uber aged that could be a little fiery, and that has to do with how they're made and how they're aged.
Oh, very good answer. Thank you.
A lot of chemistry there.
That's what it boils down to, right?
Yeah.
Who invented the margarita? I see that one.
I was going to say, I think you mentioned that, but then...
I didn't.
You didn't mention it. Okay.
I didn't. And this is an interesting one because, so I would love to say I know the answer to that, right? But the truth is, we in the industry, we professionals, who, if you saw my books right now and, agave, tequila, blah, blah, personal experiences, the education that I've done in Mexico, we don't know exactly who invented the margarita. You might be looking for Margarita Sames, who is oftentimes, she was a socialite that is oftentimes credited for having the margarita invented after her. And there's also another person named Daisy. And if you know Spanish, Margarita technically means Daisy. But there's also a very famous cocktail that also is named Daisy. So we don't know if the margarita is just a daisy that came about, by someone going, but if you use margarita, if you use tequila, right? Instead, now you have something else, and now we can just change the name from Daisy to Margarita. Or in fact, if it was in fact, I don't know, it was something that was created for this lady, Sames, as an homage, if you will. We don't know, but there's a lot of great stories out there. I know we're running out of time, so I won't get into them, but there's quite a bit of them. No one knows exactly when. We know the general area. We think it's along the border. It could have very well been on this side. It could have very well been in Mexico. And even that isn't 100% us to know just yet. We haven't quite cracked that nut.
Well, look, let's just put a legend out there. My name is Ari. Let's just say Margarita. Ari is in Margarita, so it's named after me. Let's just say that.
Listen, I've been trying for years. I create cocktails in hopes that somebody will name one after me, but it hasn't quite caught on. I'm humbled to say that there are some cocktails around the country that are named after me on menus, but nothing that's quite caught on so that someone says, hey, there's this margarita that Jaime taught me, and hey, we're not all drinking the Jaime margarita. Tommy's has done that for sure, right? The Tommy's margarita, which our fresh margaritas is modeled after, is just that, but so some people are with it.
Now Foti and I have a new goal in life. It's to name something after you, Jaime, because that's it. We got to do it.
Fair enough. I will encourage those folks out there because as we're talking about this, we made the fresh margarita, but that's just one iteration of it. I've done a million using different fruits and vegetables and things you can fold in to create different flavor profiles using the same template, the same proportions, just getting fresh berries and mint, basil and, what is it? You name it, right? Basil and pineapple, right? Adding a layer of bitters, elongating it with flavored sodas. There's millions of things you can do here. So people want to go to our Instagram at Milagro Tequila. Follow me at J the Tequila Guy, JTHE Tequila Guy, or at www.milagrotequila.com. Tons and tons of recipes. Really, this is just the very tip of the agave leaf, if you will.
There's actually one comment here that said they are totally converted because they tried it and they are totally converted to Milagro. So just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Lena, very much. I appreciate it. I will ask Vicky, who's also on. I see you, Vicky. Thank you very much for putting my information up, Vicky. Vicky will convey. Vicky, let's convey that over to my boss and all the powers that be that we're converting people, because it's I'm earning my keep. And quite honestly, all jokes aside, you know what? I'm glad. The truth is, I love people that just love the spirit. As you can tell, I'm very impassioned by it. I love everything about it. For me, it's not just about the bottle and what's in it, but the people in the hands that make it, right? Those folks behind it, because ultimately this is very representative of the culture from which it stems, and that's something I'm very proud of. So I'm glad that you are appreciating that.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Jaime. Thank you so much. You are one of those guests that I love because I speak less, and I know Fati and Catherine love that. I speak less because you are so informative, but thank you so much. You had such great information. You were really awesome. I knew you were going to be good just from the video that you guys sent us a while ago, because we got such good feedback, and you proved me right.
Great. I don't know what video that was, but I'm glad it worked for you.
You display, you demoed a cocktail. I can't remember off the top of my head, but once we posted it, everybody was writing in.
Beautiful. Well, guys, thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Nothing like capping out my night. I'll enjoy my cocktails while I clean my kitchen. Thank you for having me.
And we'll definitely have you back on. This is not the last time. Excellent.
I'd love it. Thank you. Hopefully we'll meet in person, right? Boston's one of my favorite places.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy your Milagro Tequila and the cocktails, and we'll be seeing you very soon.
We're going to share all of Jaime's info. We're going to share all of Milagro's info, and we'll also have a link on where you could purchase Milagro. Thank you everybody for listening in. And Jaime, once again, awesome job. You know your stuff.
You're wrong.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Really
salute and stay safe.
Salute.
Great meeting all you guys.
Likewise.
All
Cheers.
right.
Great to meet you.
Fati, Catherine, thank you. Jaime, thank you again. Everybody, thanks for listening, watching. We'll see you next time.